Welcome to this week's On the Fly. I'm your host, Gene DeFilippo, and our guest this week is the highly successful Director of Athletics at Appalachian State University, Doug Gillin. Doug, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Gene, outstanding. It's great to see you. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, you have been one of my favorite guys. You've done such a great job at Appalachian State. But you earned everything you got. You graduated from Cortland. You were a hockey player. You went on and got a master's degree. You worked at 3 or 4 different institutions before finally getting an AD's position. Talk to us about your journey out there, because there's a lot of young people that will want to hear about it.
Yeah, thank you, Gene. I do think it has been a journey for sure. And a lot of the student athletes of which we serve, I was like them. I was first generation college, first one in my family to go to grad school. And so when I started at Cortland, I'm playing Division III ice hockey, not exactly sure where I was going to go. And as soon as I graduated, then, trying to get into the business, I knew I wanted to be an athletic director, kind of learned that while I was a student athlete. But then I realized that master's was really, really important. And so I'm fortunate enough to catch on at Ohio University. And at that time, I was teaching phys ed classes for my stipend. So anything from bowling to tennis to racquetball, and, learned a bunch of different stuff, taught a bunch of different stuff to student athletes, but realized, even for my family and my parents, and seeing somebody, for their kids to go to school, graduate, and then go get a master's was really special for our family. And then, my sisters both got their masters after I was done. But then going to Lehigh, and, kind of we've always done. I was in the ticket and marketing office there, and was also the equipment manager on the road for football for $100 a game. To try and, because back then interns were making $1,000, pre-tax a month on 10 months. So at least that's what I was at Lehigh, and then did that for 10 months. Did the equipment manager deal, then flew out to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Didn't know anybody out there, and was really fortunate enough to catch on at the University of New Mexico. Had a great time. Mike Alden was out there, and a lot of great folks had come before me, and certainly were working there. Rudy Davilis was the athletic director at the time. But that was the same thing. That was part-time permanent. Weekends, I was working at a bed and breakfast, setting up weddings. And then I'll never forget, one of the things we got to do for a couple extra bucks was paint the numbers on all the parking stalls, so, in the heat of Albuquerque summers. So that was, but yeah, to your point, that was hard work. And then, I got really, really lucky and caught on at Missouri the first time in 1995. And I'll never forget, the salary range, as we all have seen this, the salary range was like, I think it was like 23 to 32 or something at the time. And they offered me 23. And I went back to my boss at the time and I said, well, I didn't expect to make the high end, but I didn't expect to make the low end. And so long story short, I negotiated myself all the way up to 23.5. And that was at the University of Missouri. And
you're a great negotiator.
A heck of a negotiator. Yeah. Yeah, heck of a negotiator. And so yeah, that was it's really fun now to look back on that. And from there, 2 years into that, then I hooked on with Learfield and ISP. It was Mizzou Sports Properties in 1997.
Yeah, let me interrupt you just for a minute. Talk about what you did at IMG College and where you were, and because there's a lot of similarities between being an assistant AD and being a GM at one of those institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to back up just a little bit, when I was hired at Missouri, one of the roles I knew that my boss, Randy Sissel at the time, said, when you get off the plane, you need to start selling program ads and you need to start selling sponsorships. And that was a time when really, ancillary revenue, we all were generating ancillary revenue for our athletic departments. Joe Castiglione was the AD at the time, and certainly one of the most innovative ADs around. And so started selling programs, started selling sponsorships. Learfield was doing the radio at the time. And so back then, that's when they combined it. And Joe was at the forefront of this in 1997. And Learfield really knew the radio. ISP really knew the marketing. Ben Sutton started at Wake Forest, some marketing on campus stuff. So they formed what was probably the third or fourth property at the time. And it was a combined property, joint venture between Learfield and IMG. And then we were selling radio and TV. So we're selling radio and our TV shows, and then our the on-campus promotions, the programs. Internet really wasn't that a big a deal back then. But yeah, to that point. And so then from there, ISP and Learfield and their joint ventures, that was Mizzou Sports Properties. They sent me up to Syracuse, and I just saw our good friend, unfortunately, Jake Krauthamel had passed away this week. One of the best men I've ever met in this business. Had the opportunity to work with Jake with what was Syracuse Sports Properties at that time.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? I had
Yeah.
an opportunity to work with Jake for a long time as well. And I just like to say, one of the great guys of all time.
Absolutely.
He was a character. We'll
Yes,
admit
for
that.
sure. Yeah.
He used to say all the time we would have a drink, somebody would say, well, I'll have a beer, I'll have a glass of wine. Jake, gin, rocks, olive. Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We've had those before. Yeah. You obviously were a peer, and I was working at Syracuse Sports Properties, but we both have fond memories.
Yes.
It was we had a good exchange, of text message with some of my friends that kind of in and around Syracuse that worked with Jake this week. But anyway, so then as ISP grew and we obtained more and more properties, that's when Ben Sutton brought me down to Winston-Salem for 10 years to be the sales manager over ISP. And that's when Gene, you and I went up at Boston College, working with Fenway Sports Group and ISP at the time. And so we kept growing and growing and growing. And then 2010, Ben sold ISP to IMG College. Then we became a combined kind of company. At that time, we were 175 million in gross billing. They were about the same. And then we were a $350 million enterprise there for a while. And about that time, and that was in 2010 and 2012, I was fortunate enough to get hired at Missouri by my mentor, Mike Alden, to be the deputy athletics director, and was there from 2012 to 2015. And then was really lucky to come all the way back to North Carolina as the athletic director here in 2015.
Wow. So it was 2016 that your football program entered the Sun Belt Conference. So you were right on the cusp of that.
Yes. Yep.
Doug, gotta ask you about your football program. You have had tremendous success. You've won 3 national championships at the FCS level. You're one of 4 institutions to play in 3 consecutive FCS championship games. You've beaten the University of Michigan in 2007. You beat North Carolina in 2019. Just this past year, you go out to Texas A&M and you beat the 6th-ranked Aggies. Tell us about your football program. What's the secret sauce?
Well, I do think, Gene, some of that, like 2005, 6, 7, those national champions, the win over Michigan way before my time here. I do believe that you can't put a price on history and tradition. Now, over time. It's hard. You can't just snap your fingers. You look at today, any time period where folks think there's a quick fix, there's not. One of the things that we've been very fortunate of, we've had a rich history of tradition, success, I think culture, certainly the culture that Jerry Moore built here. And then that just carried over. Now, and all of our student athletes along the way, as you mentioned, oh, by the way, in 2015, when I arrived, that year we got beat by Clemson. 2016, we lost in overtime to Tennessee. 2017, we got beat at Georgia. 2018, we lost in overtime at Penn State. And then, and actually we lost to Wake Forest on the last second, where we had a kick to win it and we didn't win it here. And then, so some of those wins too were like, the Michigan thing is kind of, when is the next one? When is the next one? And then in 19, we won at North Carolina, we won at South Carolina, and then at Texas A&M. I do think, Gene, it's a blue collar mentality. I think, our coach before we played North Carolina this year, we lost by 2 points late, but here at our place the week before we beat Texas A&M, not one of our student athletes was recruited by North Carolina. Not one of them went on a visit to North Carolina. Not one of their student athletes came on a visit to Appalachian State. I do think it's a mentality that when you go into those games, and it's football, It's just football. Like, who wants to play harder? Who's going to make the plays and work hard enough to win? And I think we have been very, very fortunate. We recruit student athletes that fit, and it's hard to define, but there is a fit up here in the mountains of North Carolina. It's not for everybody, but if you want to come get a world-class education and play for championships, this is a place people come, and they come in with a chip on their shoulder and they play hard.
Coach Moore had a big part in setting the culture there, didn't he? Can you
Absolutely.
explain a little bit about what we're talking about by that culture?
Yeah, I think I have it on my wall here. Today I give my all for App State. He always, if he signs something today, he'll sign it like always do more than what's expected. And that was one of his mantras. And he had a number of them. And the student athletes that come back, the men now, family men, grown men that come back that played for Jerry Moore, it is amazing how they feel about the man, the coach, and the culture that he built. And I do think it was around those two things stick in my mind the most when I'm talking to him is always do more than what's expected and give your all for Appalachian State.
Yeah.
And that has stuck with and permeated throughout certainly the folks that have come through the program and Jerry Moore was coaching and since then. And even when you look at some of our coaches that have left here and they go over and take over different programs, you see some of that same, it might be give your all for X other place, you know what I'm saying? But they've taken some of that with them. And I just think that's instilled, and then to watch it kind of permeate, not just throughout our football program, but as coaches have left and gone to different programs, you can just see it, throughout college football in different places. It's fun to watch.
Yeah. Culture is really important. It beats scheme. It beats, some talent all the time, but there has to be something said, for recognizing talent, if it's your system, number one, and number two, developing that talent so that it can beat the likes of North Carolina, South Carolina, Michigan. Your coaches have done a great job of evaluating and then developing players. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. And I think, you'll see that, when you have the measurables, as and you've been there, if you're at in certain conferences, certain leagues, some folks look at measurables, whether that's height, weight, speed, arm length, etc. Our folks might measure, they might be a little bit shorter, they might be a step slower, they might be at whatever position it might be. Their arm length might not be the same. I think what we look for is folks that are really passionate about the game of football. And I can say that about every sport of which we have here at Appalachian is, are you passionate about playing the sport? And we had this conversation with our full athletic staff this morning. We're talking about, and I know you and I don't want to go down, talk too much about NIL or all this other stuff that's going on. But I think one of the best quotes I saw this week, Gene, was, or this year so far, was the TCU head football coach, Sonny Dykes, when he was talking about, somebody was asking about NIL, and he said something about like, we're looking for folks that are really passionate about playing football. And I think that really rings true at Appalachian. And we're trying to measure heart. We're trying to measure grit. We're trying to measure want to. And we want folks who are really passionate about the sport.
You're sure doing a heck of a job of it. Let's go on to another subject. As you were on your journey, Doug, what advice would you give to a young Doug Gillin on the way up?
Yeah, I think what worked for me and might not work for everybody, but take a chance, bet on yourself. I mentioned when I moved out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I didn't know anybody out there. I took my old hockey bag, stuffed it with some clothes, and flew out there, landed in the airport, and my friend Sean Johnson was there with just my name on it. I didn't know anybody. So I think take a chance, bet on yourself, and then hard work always carries the day. It sounds cliche, but you got to outwork anybody as you're coming up, and then don't ever get complacent. I think those are the four things that really, when I think about advice, what I would say is, and then for me, like I always thought, as long as I could raise revenue, I'm employable. And that's whether it was in sales with ISP, IMG, or certainly in fundraising, um, in building relationships. I think the last thing I would say, Gene, is nothing great in life happens without great relationships,
So true.
and focus on those.
So repeat those again for us if you can. They were building relationships.
Building relationship, take a chance,
Yep.
bet on yourself, generate revenue. Those were my 5. I think I'm going to miss one in there, but those are kind of the 5 that come to the top of mind.
Great. Those young people out here that are listening to this and have a goal to be a director of athletics one day, remember those 4 or 5 things, because they're so necessary. They really are. Doug, I was the athletic director at USC upstate for 2.5 or 3 years. I understand Boone. I've been skiing there. I played golf in the summer at your great golf courses there. You said it's not for everybody, but man, your campus is beautiful. It's a great area of the country. Tell some of the people about how great it is in Boone.
Yeah, I think, it's amazing. Like I say, it's not for everybody, but I love it. And me and my family love it. And it's one of those things where you meet alums when they come back and they bring their families back, wives, kids, husbands, and there's just a gleam in their eye when they come back in Boone. And when you say welcome home, you just can feel it, the passion that folks have for Appalachia and the mountains of Boone, North Carolina. And for us, it's obviously you got 4 seasons. You have some of the best falls you could ever have in terms of colors. I mean, when you have people that flock to your home, which is Boone, to look at leaves, or to go skiing, or to go hiking in the summer. I've never experienced this in all my travels, to live in a resort town where the demographics change 3 and 4 times a year, which I find fascinating. There's people that come in from Florida in the winter, or in the summer to be up here. I mean, it's amazing. And then the people that you meet, I'll give you a quick story, Gene. I met somebody the other day, literally met him at a restaurant, and I'd never met him before. And I was introduced to him, and we started talking about what I do. And they said, hey, I'm actually from XYZ place, and this is my school, but guess what? Appalachian's my second school. The next week they sent me $10,000 to support Appalachian State Athletics.
How about that?
It was that doesn't happen every day, but we have a lot of different folks that come up and get introduced to Appalachian State Athletics because of where we live. And I tell you, everybody, the only reason, and it happens, right? So you got to wind around sometimes to get up here, depending on the way you come, and if it's foggy out, it's not good. And one of the stories we had was, a recruit and his mom came up, and it was a little windy, maybe a little foggy. Well, they didn't end up coming to Appalachian, but other than that, it's beautiful. We got world-class university, world-class facilities, and the people are just as good as can be expected. It's
got a great athletic director too. Doug, tell us why somebody out there should bet on Appalachian State. And I'm not talking about betting money,
right?
But I'm saying getting behind Appalachian State because they respect the organization and they feel that there's a growth in a lot of areas, both monetarily, facility-wise, and everything, that you're on the rise. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, ever since we've been in FBS and FCS, wildly successful in FCS, and certainly in FBS, when the first 6 years we were bowl eligible, 6 straight bowl wins, 7 straight bowls, lost our first one last year. But I think, one of the things that we've done is we've been intentional when folks talk about how can you continue to grow, and are you looking at different conferences, are you different, like looking at different realignment, et cetera. Ours has always been, and it sounds somewhat cliche, is just to make the Sun Belt the best that it can be. And so we think that if you hang out in a good neighborhood, all boats lift higher. And certainly, we won 4 championships in the Sun Belt since we've been in the league. And then now we have even more certainly successful programs in the league. So now that lifts all boats higher, including Appalachians. So we just got done building a $50 million end zone facility. We're looking at $95 million worth of projects, including a new weight room, new indoor tennis track, outdoor tennis, softball, and a complete east side of our stadium, because we're sold out every week this year, Gene. We're sold out. We know going into next year, with the way that we've built this league and the way that we've scheduled, with East Carolina coming in, homecoming, family weekend, we know today that we're sold out all 6 games next year. So what you're doing is you're betting. We used to be the little engine that could, right? And everybody is like, come on, get behind us, because we're a little engine that could. We have lofty goals. We think that realignment in college athletics and what's going on now and what might happen in the future, that with the Sun Belt of which we built, you're top 4, 5, 6 leagues in America and continuing to grow. The only thing we don't have are the big TV contracts right now. So we have to go out. We have to be out, innovate folks. We have to be more entrepreneurial than folks, because we don't start with that $30 million check. But we're right on their heels in every sport. And so that's why I think folks should invest in folks like us, because you go back to that quote I was mentioning earlier. We're not doing it on big NIL deals. We're not doing it on big collectives. We're doing it on grassroots marketing, people investing and winning.
Yeah. How about monetarily? Now, you said you're not making $30 million a year like some of the FBS, other FBS schools, but will you raise more revenue, multimedia rights? How are you going to close that gap?
Yeah, and that's why I think it was really important. And we were really intentional when we looked at realignment, and we were an integral part of that with the Sun Belt as we were planning what we would do. As it was unraveling, or things were changing last year. And we were intentional about, we want to be a league, since we don't have some of those television contracts that others have that I mentioned. We knew that we need to win at the gate. We need to win in the merchandise. We need to win in concessions. We need to win in sponsorships. And all that means put people in butts and seats. And so it was very intentional for us, when we added James Madison a 4-hour trip, or Old Dominion a 5-hour trip, or Marshall a 5-hour trip. And we're already seeing that. We're already seeing great travel from opposing teams coming to our place and us going to their place. But that's filling our stadiums. That's supply and demand. When we played North Carolina here to open up our season this year, our ticket price was it fluctuated between the second and the first highest on the secondary market, between, I believe it was whoever was Ohio State or in Michigan were playing, somebody like that. It was our ticket price in the secondary market was second to only like a big time game, like a bigger.
Ohio State opened the season against Notre Dame, so you're in pretty good company.
Yeah, it was Ohio State, Notre Dame, and then App State and Carolina. And the ticket prices on the secondary market were consistent between those 2 games. So then obviously you're selling more concessions, you're selling more merchandise, everything's at an all-time high. That doesn't get you to 30 million, but you're starting to chip away a little bit, Gene, and that allows people to continue to invest in the vision. And as they invest in the vision, you can start chipping away, and like money doesn't buy everything. We just got to make sure that we have everything we can do to benefit the health and wellness of our student athletes and give them everything they can do to be competitive. And we've done that.
You sure have. Not only have you had success on the playing fields, Doug, but you've had tremendous success in the classroom. Why don't you share that with our listeners?
Yeah, thanks, Gene. We believe, like all of us that are invested in college athletics, that academics changes lives. Going to college and getting that college degree changes lives. And certainly, we're going to play whatever sport, and we're going to contribute, and we're going to make sure our student athletes have the opportunities to win on the fields of play, but we're also going to make sure they win in life by getting that degree. And so, as you mentioned, here at Appalachian, it's actually 10 years. It's 20 straight semesters over 3.0 cumulative GPA.
20 straight semesters.
Yeah, 20 straight semesters, 10 years, 3.0 GPA. And we really believe it comes down to recruiting. So we talk about, with all of our head coaches, recruit student athletes that compete in the classroom first and foremost. They have to be able to compete in the classroom before they can ever compete for us athletically. So that we take that really, really importantly. Academics change lives. Make sure you recruit student athletes that can compete academically, which we've done for the last 10 years. And then that transitions onto the fields of play. And so our mantra is, when we're recruiting, come to Appalachian State. you're going to get a world-class education and play for championships. And as we mentioned earlier, that's kind of our pitch. And then we spend all of our time, resources, and energy making sure that we take care of the student athletes once they get here.
Right. You must have a real good support system too for the student athletes, Doug, to help them in if they should need tutors or should they need a particular help in a certain subject.
Absolutely. So, since I've been here in the last 8 years, we've increased our tutors, we've increased our learning specialists. So one thing we're really proud of, Gene, is we've increased, when we arrived 8 years ago, we really only had one orthopedic surgeon. Now we actually have 13 health professionals between our orthopedic surgeons, our orthopedists, our physical therapists, our team docs, gen med docs. We have a whole healthcare team, as you know, and you've done. And from a nutritionist, we had 0. Now we have 3. We had, from a mental health, we had 0. Now we have 3, including a full-time mental health, full-time sports performance, training, strength and conditioning, everything other folks have. And we tell recruits when they come here, we have every service from academics to everything that you could need to be successful in college athletics at Appalachia State.
We're out of time on this week's On the Fly. I'm your host, Gene DeFilippo. I want to thank our guest, Doug Gillin, the Director of Athletics at Appalachian State University, for being with us. Thanks for your time this time, and we'll see you next time.